Today, I am going to continue talking about from the book In Love with the World by Mingyur Rinpoche. Tonight, I'm going to start with chapter 28, When the Cup Shatters. And this chapter is about him approaching death and going through the stages of the Bardo of dying. And so this really culminates with the meeting of the mother and child, luminosity. So the previous chapter has gone through his illness and how his body is gradually getting sicker and sicker, weaker and weaker. He has some kind of stomach and intestinal infection that is causing him to both vomit and to have diarrhea. He can't keep water down. He's becoming dehydrated. Well, he begins this chapter by saying that he finally was able to accept this, and that this acceptance brought a feeling of renewal. He was no longer putting energy into fighting it, that he accepted that he is going to die. So he had more energy now. On the other hand, he quickly realizes that his body is getting worse and is definitely approaching death. He no longer has what he called this inner voice telling him that things will be okay in the long run. On the other hand, his mind feels stronger than it has in the past few days. And he starts again an offering practice that he talked about in the previous chapters. But this time it has more resolve and more devotion, in his words, than it had the day before, because now there's just no question he is going to die. So he immerses himself in giving everything away, quote, with giving everything I had to whatever was happening right now, to meet the demands of this moment without attachment or aversion, and to befriend any adversity. That's on page 220. So images came and went through his mind. He doesn't dwell on them. He doesn't stay with them long enough for him to develop attachment. He acknowledges whatever it is that emerged in his mind, and then let it be without attachment and without bringing up his associations to that image. By doing this, and at this point in his process of dying and just plain giving up, trying to fight it, he also starts noticing how wonderful the natural beauty of the earth is and the diversity of earth. And by looking at it this way, this gave him a deeper connection to the world and also the inhabitants. In Tibetan Buddhism, frequently the world is described as the vessel, and sentient beings are considered the contents, as well as the natural world, at least the part that grows. So He then examines his wealth and talks about his precious human birth as a treasure. And quite honestly, he's talked about his wealth in the past, and he doesn't own monasteries. He doesn't have a bank account, and so on down the line. So he's looking at wealth at this point very differently than perhaps we would. Quote, "My only offering now is how I manifest this Dharma treasure, how I manifest living, how I manifest dying, how I live this moment, this only moment." That is the offering that he is talking about. And then he makes aspirations, and he says, the earth is my witness to these aspirations. And the Buddha said, the earth is my witness soon after he attained enlightenment, because Mara asked him, how do I know that you're enlightened? Mara could be considered an external demon, or it could be an internal demon of self-deception. Either way, in Buddhism, Mara is looked at as an obstacle to traveling the path, especially self-deception. And so when Mara asked the Buddha, are you enlightened, or how do I know you're enlightened? He touched the earth and said, the earth is my witness. So his aspirations went like this. This isn't all of them. May I be the joy and the love of Dharma. May I rest in the joy and love of Dharma. Let my activities of body, speech, and mind be pure, cleansed of distortion, unsullied by vanity, true to my own pure Buddha nature. So this is where having a calm, clear mind is really important. This is my own commentary here. What would be going on in your mind at this point? Think about that for a little while. Perhaps later, because I'm going to continue with my talk. I'm not going to give you time to think about that, but contemplate that later on. What would be going on in your mind at this point? There you are, helpless, alone, knowing that you're dying. He stopped holding on to his body, and that was an offering. Faces continued to pass through his mind, hundreds of faces, he said, friends, family, teachers, monks. He offered his mother to the Buddhas for their protection. He tries to maintain neutrality with this part of the offering, which was very difficult. He mentions that the thought of leaving his family broke his heart, and he cries with tears flowing down his face. On the other hand, also gratitude starts to arise from this offering practice. Gratitude merged with compassion and awareness for all the things that people have done for him. You might say what the world has done for him during his life. He says he bursts into tears, sobbing and shaking. I mean, this is not just a little sniffling and bringing the handkerchief to your eyes. By mid-afternoon, he says that his mind is settled into a deeper state of resting. Thoughts come and go without distraction. Without disturbance, a slightly different word. And he starts experiencing the beginning of the dissolution of elements. So the separation of between air inside his body and outside becomes indistinct. And his body becomes heavy. The earth element has dissolved into the water element. He remains in recognition of awareness. And again, it requires a lot of practice to be able to do that. His mouth becomes dry, and he realizes the water element is dissolving into fire. He has the sensation of his body floating, of his body melting, just plain falling apart. And of course, he has no control over this. He then mentally reviews the Bardo map, quote unquote, because he wants to get things right. This is a fantastic opportunity to attain complete, perfect Buddhahood. So then he notices that his extremities are becoming cold, which is the fire element dissolving into air. His vision fades. He starts seeing red flashes. His mind becomes clearer and clearer, on the other hand, because his conceptual mind is fading. Then he mentions that his confidence and recognition remain stable and strong, and so his awareness continues. His mind feels energized, actually. He says that the decision to remain here, and accept whatever happens, quote, protected myself with acceptance. That's a short quote. Protected myself with acceptance. He feels like he's being filled up with air, which is the solution of the air element. His body becomes spacious, fills with air. He felt like his body was imploding into infinite emptiness, dissolving into infinite emptiness. And he says, this is the cup cracking. His body is completely paralyzed at this point, yet his consciousness is unchanged. His mind is blissful and continues to expand to fill up the entire universe. There's still a sense of I, he comments. He rests in the awareness. The body structure is completely gone, yet his mind keeps expanding. Quote, the cup that is called child luminosity had shattered. End quote. That's on 223. He almost blacks out at this point but does remain in awareness and consciousness. And he starts seeing red and white flashes. This is pretty classic to the teachings on the Bardo of dying. Next come the meeting of the mother and child luminosity. He said that awareness and emptiness became one. The universe became unified with consciousness. He still understood what was going on, but it wasn't through conceptual means. This was beyond conceptual means. Quote, the clarity and luminosity of awareness beyond concepts, beyond fixed mind, became the sole vehicle for knowing. That's on page 226. And of course, this is just beyond our comprehension because we haven't experienced this before. He says that there was in the past a separation between him and phenomena, but now perception happened without a perceiver. There are the three wheels, which I have talked about, and I'm sure many of you have heard this from other sources as well. And the three wheels are having a perceiver, a perceived, and an act of perceiving. So it's really, you might say, the basis of subject and object. This is gone. The three wheels are gone. He says that I, me are gone. He has no memory. He says that this occurred around 2 a.m. and lasted for 5 to 6 hours. And during that period of time, that would be 3 to 4 hours, he experienced no conceptual mind. His mind merged with space, vast beyond measurement, comprehension, and imagination. He says the trees manifested awareness. The world was love. This reminds me a bit of the description of Dewa Chen, which is a Buddha realm, an enlightened realm. Quote, every particle was alive with love, fluid flowing without barriers. So some other words here that would be good that he used were clarity behind ideas, vibrant, energetic, all-seeing, all of these words he used. And again, they are just concepts, and what he was experiencing was free of concepts. And so he's really not talking about what he experienced. He's indicating the best he can what he experienced to us who have not experienced what he experienced. On the other hand, a person that had experienced similar things, the union of the mother and the child, and lived, if that person was with Mingyur Rinpoche, they wouldn't have to talk even. They would kind of nod knowingly. So then he feels that towards the end of this experience, he acknowledged that his teaching mission was not complete. It was in a non-conceptual way. It wasn't about thinking about it. But this aspiration to teach and benefit others in this lifetime became stronger and stronger. And the, quote, infinite spaciousness of awareness, end quote, slowly withdraws and eases the reconnection to his body. He said that the first sensation he had after that happened was a sense of gravity, that his sensory system kicked in again. After an hour, he can move his fingers. He looks around and sees that everything is the same and also at the same time utterly transformed. And this is his last recollection of being at the cremation stupa. I think you could say he passed out. He doesn't quite say that, but in the next chapter, which is chapter 29 in the Bardo of Becoming, in this chapter, he does talk a little bit about the time after that. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on this chapter, and just to kind of give an introduction to it. Part of what he does in this chapter is just plain reorient himself to where he is. He's in a hospital now. And who he is, reorienting himself to who he is, and also the phenomenal world. As he said at the end of the last chapter, it is the same and utterly transformed at the same time. I would say he might slightly disagree with me that before he experienced the Bardo of dying and then came back, he was in samsara. Now he has transcended samsara and nirvana. He is experiencing the world the way realized beings experience the world. I gave a talk about the 10 bhumis recently, and obviously he has experienced emptiness, and that this experience has a certain stability about it. So he is at least on the second bhumi, and quite possibly gone through a number of other bhumis and is on a higher bhumi than that. We really don't know, but he's just talking about his own experience. And quite honestly, a person like us cannot judge what bhumi a person is on. The point that I'm making is that he has attained a very high level of realization. And he talks about the world being made of light and full of love. And hence the title, In Love with the World, because he finds himself full of love too, boundless love. So to get on with the chapter, there are numerous places where he speculates on where he is, and if it is a Bardo, an actual Bardo between death and birth, rather than a Bardo of life where it is between the end of one thing and the beginning of another thing. He questions, he observes, he examines. So this is important to remember, that every moment dies, every day dies, every morning is new. We are constantly and continually dying and being reborn. Can we open our eyes to this? Or do we keep on planning for the future, filling up the present and living in the past? Well, during doing all of this, living in our own bubble created by our mind. So when he regains consciousness, he's in a hospital. He's somewhat disoriented. He has drip bags on his arm, or at least dripping into his arm. He's lying in bed, but he's not fully aware of his situation and his surroundings. He goes over a lot of things in his mind. And one of the things that he mentions is that there's gravity, so I'm not dead. If he were a Bardo being, he would not be affected by gravity because he would have no body. It would be a mental body. His mind goes back to the cremation stupa. Quote, if I had fully realized luminous emptiness, then I wouldn't be here. End quote. That's on 229. So when he says that, that's an indication that he feels he's not in the Bardo between death and birth. So the question is, where am I? Am I in a Bardo of becoming, a Bardo of Dharmata? So now he's back to wondering if he is in a Bardo between death and birth. He feels that he didn't experience the quote, collapse of the father and mother energies, end quote. So he feels this isn't a Bardo. So to kind of go into that in a little bit more detail, that we have at the time of conception, you have the father and the mother energies that join. This is with a human being. And then as the body develops and there's a head, the mother energy travels to the head and the father energy travels further down the body. And at the time of death, then these energies, the father energy rises towards the heart center, the mother energy descends towards the heart center. And then when they meet, that is an important time in terms of what to do in the Bardo of dying. So he feels he didn't experience that. So he feels this is not the Bardo because that was one experience he did not have. He thinks that the experience of last night was like a dream. He remembers it, but it was like a dream. So he asks himself, what is the illusory dream I'm having now? On page 230, quote, the entire room feels afloat, on an iridescent pier. Forms rise and fall within rippling moments of radiance. And this sounds to me like the descriptions that I have read and heard about the experience of the world or phenomena as emptiness, that it's not solid, it's the shimmering and radiant and made out of light. He also, much earlier in the book, had talked about how some of his students had come to him and had these experiences that they couldn't explain. And some of them did sound a bit like this quote that I just read. So the ultimate spaciousness that he experienced, he says, is contracting into shapes that are, quote, dancing together and separating and radiating light and love. He stresses this a number of times in this chapter, this point that love is radiating from the world to us if we are open to it. He thinks, am I in the Bardo of Dharmata? And this is the Bardo that the 100 wrathful and peaceful deities appear. And he says, well, there are no deities here. And I said, I'm not visiting friends and family members because, again, in the Bardo, since you just have a mental body, if you think about family, you will go to the family member that you thought about. You will go to the house and you will go through walls, but they won't see you. They won't recognize you. They will not hear you. But that is what he's talking about here when he says, but I'm not visiting friends. So he decides he's not in the actual Bardo of becoming. He feels in between the death of the old and the birth of the new. He wonders if he wakes up, can he see new opportunities for realization? Can he take advantage of them to attain Buddhahood? Eventually, he understands that he is in a hospital. But he says still the people seem more like a dream than like solid, that they appear transparent and gliding like they were on water. And again, he mentions that he couldn't feel or tell if he was dreaming from an everyday perspective or dreaming from his illusory body. He just did not know at this point. He does say that he is enjoying the dream. It's very pleasant. Quote, the experience is familiar through post-meditation states that I have known, but it is more vivid, stronger, and with more complete presence of emptiness. And another quote from that same page is, all forms arise as magic displays of color and light, a sky of rainbows, there and not there, beyond time, beyond direction, unborn and without end. I found in this chapter, it was good to just plain quote and not try to put it into my own words. He has it in very good words. But I'm saying these things to emphasize them. So this is the way that the world appears to realized being. This magical display of colors and light, there, both there and both not there. And he says he loves this new world that he is inhabiting. This is the true nature of phenomena. And he realizes then, and he passes this on, and of course this is for us, that there would be no finalities, no ends, no negation, only change and transformation. Because of impermanence, there can be change and transformation. Without impermanence, nothing could change or transform. It's that simple. Deathless awareness, he mentions, is possible both in life and in death. That life and death are just concepts. Death is an illusion. Life is an illusion. Now he's in paradise in the hospital. And he contrasts his experience with that of the train station in Varanasi, where, in his words, he walked into hell with his heart closed. Now he feels his heart is wide open. Quote, all life is a magic display of light and form, a universe of infinite blessings that invites us to turn our hearts inside out and love completely, to love until the inexhaustible end of dreams. End of quote. That's on 234. So here he repeats again what I talked about in the previous chapter when I said that he felt he came back without dying because of his strong aspiration to benefit beings. That is what brought him back to his body, so he continued the work of Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche. He said he had been experiencing the ultimate luminous emptiness, the union of compassion, love, bliss, space, and emptiness. And actually, this reminds me a bit of deity practice, where we imagine ourselves as an enlightened being made out of light, not solid. We're like a rainbow in the sky. And then we radiate light to the deity in the deity's pure land, remind them of their vow to benefit all sentient beings, and they return with their blessings. This isn't exactly what happened to him, but it is like you are waking up the deity, reminding them of their vow to benefit beings. And so he was reminded of his strong vow to benefit beings in this lifetime. And he mentions that the, quote, mind states, end quote, that he entered come from mind and are experienced by people all around the globe and in the past, that they're not unique to Buddhism. However, the language of Buddhism, he feels, gives it context And that helps the experience bear fruit. If you have the experience and then you don't build on it, it can't bear fruit. He liked the language of the mother and child luminosity. He said, it's such a sweet, soft, and loving image. He delighted in the, quote, visceral warmth, end quote, of the mother and child reunion. He felt childlike, with happiness beyond conception. And well, earlier, he had expressed feeling regret when he was still at the cremation stupa for returning to the body. Now he felt like he was in paradise. Even if he could have attained liberation from samsara, if he had died, he is quite happy with now living in paradise. He uses the term state of reverie, in fact. Now, at this point, the Asian man walks into this big hospital room, which is full of beds. He does not have a private room. And the man explains to him how he got there, that the man had found him by the stupa, transported him to the hospital, and paid for his treatment, his expenses, and 2 nights stay in the hospital. And then he put money in Rinpoche's backpack, gave him his card, and said, call if you ever needed money. And then he left. And Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche says, quote, this must be a dream. To Mingyur Rinpoche, this man's kindness doesn't stand out. It's one of the many instances where quote, people helped me on my journey. And this reminded me that it's good to reflect on people who have helped us in the past to get to where we are today, parents, teachers, people who provide us with food, clothing, shelter, medicine, protection, comfort, friendship, Dharma teachings, and so on and so forth. That there is so much because of interdependence that we have received from others and from the world that has benefited from us, that we have benefited from. And it's really good to reflect on this. It helps us, you might say, reconnect rather than feeling separate from the rest of the world. He feels confidence that he will be taken care of in this new world. The next day, the drips are removed, the machines are removed, and he walks around the hospital, sees the front gate and the world beyond. He says he finds that he doesn't distinguish himself between the chaos, the dirty, the sick people waiting to come in, the noise, and so forth outside is no problem. And you really have to have been to India to appreciate what he is talking about. There's no more uptight feelings. He can't wait to get out and help people who, quote, do not know that liberation is waking up to the dream as a dream, end quote. That's on 238. He's learned that death is life, dying is rebirth. If we don't let ourselves die, we can't be reborn. Before he leaves the hospital, he says this, that once you recognize your inner wisdom, you are not confined by place. Quote, you are everywhere and nowhere. And what he's getting at here is that mind is beyond time and place. It's not made out of substance. And we define place based on substance. We define where we are based on where we are on the face of the earth. We define the place of the earth based on other objects in outer space. So that the earth is spinning around the sun. We're part of the solar system, which the center of which is the sun. Yet the sun is part of a galaxy. And we are spinning around the center of this galaxy. The whole solar system is. And this galaxy is merely one of billions and billions of galaxies that are all moving through space, and again, defined by other objects in that space. But since mind is not made out of matter, it has no location. It is our confusion that causes us to grasp on our mind being located within our body. He remembers a quote that his father had, quote, when you become one with everything, you can do anything. You are capable of boundless love and compassion and can manifest in ways that can benefit other beings. And Mingyur Rinpoche says that as a child, he could not understand this. Now he does understand it. So going back to what's actually happening in his life, he says that the doctor comes into the room and says that he has another night of paid stay at the hospital and that he really needs to be here and observed for one more night. But he does not follow the doctor's advice and he leaves. He feels that he's endowed with, quote, supernatural strength, imbued with acceptance, spaciousness, awareness, compassion, and emptiness, end quote. He looks back and appreciates the good things and especially the bad things that have assisted him on the path, especially his illness. And this is a really, really important point to make, and that is that we can look at our lives. And we all have difficult moments in our lives. We all do. But on the other hand, if we use them with wisdom, they become part of our assets, you might say, our resources. They become aids to us traveling on the path. And we can develop gratitude for it. I had a very difficult childhood with very difficult parents, and eventually, thanks to the Dharma, I came to realize that it was because of all that pain and suffering that I experienced that I eventually came to the Dharma. And eventually I developed not only a feeling of goodwill towards my parents, but also a feeling of gratitude that if it wasn't for them, I probably would not have been suffering enough to have been interested in reducing and eliminating eventually my suffering. Mingyur Rinpoche said that the unknown became safe now, that he embraced uncertainty, that he had greater confidence than he had ever known. Overwhelming love. He teaches that if we don't block what arrives in our life, there is no boundary to our love and our compassion. No boundary to our love and compassion. So I'm just going to finish up with a quote from the very last words in that, last sentences in that chapter, which is on, I guess I don't have a page number for this. This empty body passed through another dream gate, the hospital gate, to continue this dream journey, to help others wake up, and to know that liberation comes from recognizing the dream as a dream. We are all of us together dreaming ourselves into being, dying into being, becoming and becoming, always becoming.